You came to the US with $900 in your pocket, and your first flight ever took in your life was flying to the US.
I remember we used to live in a one-bedroom, not even an apartment, a rented place. My parents would sleep in the living room because that's the only other room we had. And in our room, we had like 6 people, 7 people because there were 5 of us, me and my brother, who were siblings. You don't expect me to be speaking this kind of English coming out of the poorest state of India. So if you can remember those days, you can do entrepreneurship all day long.
So you really know what it means to go to bed hungry.
I can say is education matters so much more than anything else. Not counting money makes you feel like you're still at zero. And it's a good place to be in, invest in people, but also find hunger anywhere in the world. Not just hunger, but innovators. I think hunger to me is a proxy for long-term greed. Had it not been for the public cloud, we probably had been bigger than VMware. Probably would be a $100 billion company. I just realized I'm very good at letting go, like really, really good at letting go. So good that I could write a book on it. I believe in suffering, in vulnerability. Maybe that's the entrepreneur's way of saying normalize adversity. How bad can it get? Well, you're ready for it.
People that are anxious will survive because they'll go ahead and educate themselves. Do you ever just sit and wonder and just look at your life and like, holy hell, like, I'm a kid from the Indian village. How did this all happen? My dear friend Dheeraj, how are you?
Very good, Ephraim. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Looking forward to it.
You're welcome. It's a real honor, and I am super excited about this. I heard incredible things. You know, I had one direction of how this conversation is going to go, but I'm going to start off with something else. If I look at what you're wearing right now, you're wearing a Bruno Cucinelli hat, a Zegna vest, and I don't know the brands you're wearing for your shirt or your jeans. It's incredible because you came to the US with $900 in your pocket, and your first flight ever took in your life was flying to the US. And now you look now at your journey and pull on the opposite end. You came to the land of the dream, the land of opportunity. I want to get into that story. Like, how does it make you feel first of all, to be on the other side? What was the feeling when you came to the US with $900 in your pocket and you landed in this big city? If I'm not mistaken, it took you 40 hours to get here. Tell me about it.
First of all, kudos to your observation. I mean, you definitely are observant. I think I've used a little bit of taste to also sort of get closer to design. So we'll talk about this as to taste and brand and design to build companies too and products. But I think back in the day, it was just very grounded upbringing. When I was growing up, things were tough. Things were fairly hard for my parents as well. And as you said, I've never taken a flight in my life. I've never really taken off above ground. And the social network, just my family network, was very helpful, very, very helpful. You know, my maternal side and paternal side. You know how they say that, you know, the US has gotten too nuclear. India was the opposite of that, especially the poorer states were even more closer, you know. I mean, so I come from the poorest state of the country. The GDP per capita is the lowest in India for that state, and one of the most populous states in terms of population density as well. You know, I could obviously see a different India in the 90s, which was really growing up because of meritocrats like the finance minister there, Manmohan Singh, and so on. And I could see what it meant to be a more capitalistic sort of country, which we were not, because for 40 years we're pursuing this diffuse idea of socialism, and it really hadn't landed us anywhere, you know. So I was learning a lot about that. I think going to IITs was the best thing for me. I mean, the government took care of higher education, which is one of the best things to happen to me was the IIT education. And then an even better thing happened with UT Austin, you know, the fact that it became a fellow of the computer science department. So I have a ton of gratitude for everybody that really helped me grow to where I am. Obviously, can't say this without all the sacrifices my parents had to make. There is gratitude and grace and just, I would say, memories about people that really surround me for the first 20 years of my life before I landed in the US.
What were the hardships growing up?
One was economic. My father used to work for the state government. It was the poorest state. I remember we used to live in a one-bedroom, not even an apartment, a rented place. My parents would sleep in the living room because that's the only other room we had. And in our room, we had like 6 people, 7 people because there were 5 of us, me and my brother who were siblings, and then 3 of my cousins who actually grew up with me. And then there was my aunt. We all would be in one room. six of us. There were times my father wouldn't get paid for like 6, 9 months of his salary because of all the corruption and everything that was going on in that part of the world. So I remember when we get green vegetables, it was considered a good thing. Like, hey, we could actually go beyond potatoes and some bread. At that time, there was a lot that was actually good. Obviously, my mom had to ask a lot. She had to sell all her jewelry to pay for us stuff. But she insisted that, look, education matters more than anything else. And I would say that it was her conviction and fierce resolve that really got us through, because you wouldn't expect me to be speaking this kind of English coming out of the poorest state of India. The fact that she said, look, language matters. Obviously, we are in the world of LLM, so we all know how much language matters now, but language matters, instruction of education matters, the meaning of instruction matters. And, whatever it takes to really get through education, I would do that. The sacrifices that she made, the help that my relatives gave, even the fact that my dad, he is a very, very gentlemanly person, extremely down to earth and honest person. He also got lost in this milieu as well. I think all I have is like, wow, we went through a lot for the first, I would say, 16 years of my life. And it's like nothing can be worse than that. So if you can remember those days, you can do entrepreneurship all day long.
So you really know what it means to go to bed hungry.
Yeah, I mean, we probably didn't go hungry. There was always some carbs and calories for us, but I think there were times we'd feel like, how would we pay for the school's fees next month or something, and schools were actually fairly expensive because they're private schools. We didn't go to public schools. And I think the fact that it was so biased towards education made everything else extremely basic. And I think it was the right call. This goes back to the idea of product management. How do you really look at one thing and do it 10x better than everything else? My mom had figured out that the only thing that mattered is education.
Wow.
And I feel good about it.
Were they able to see your success and you're able to show appreciation for what they did for you?
Yeah, they live with us now. We are a family of 8 with 5 of us, and then my parents and my mother-in-law, we all live together. And it's great for our children to see what it means to take care of your parents. Almost 25 years ago, we bought them the first car and the first house and all that. I can say is education matters so much more than anything else.
Right. But how do you how do you tie your experience upbringing to how you're going to educate your kids? Because your kids grew up the polar opposite, not knowing what's going to be for supper, essentially. And like, are you going to get fresh vegetables or vegetables from a
Hmm.
month ago? So how do you educate them about money and even give them like essentially that chip on the shoulder that they could go ahead and do whatever they need to do that's going to carry them through to build great companies to do whatever they want to do in life?
Part of it is having them relate to adversity of any kind. Adversity is a good thing, as people have heard Jensen talk about suffering. Even in the way they do sports these days, there's a ton of suffering. The losses actually make you extremely anti-fragile. One thing we're doing is having them appreciate adversity, even if it means losses and wins, highs and lows. What does it mean to really keep that average line versus going through the highs and lows is really important. The fact that we are working hard for them, my wife and I are working really hard for them, and just the fact that I have to continue to work really hard. In fact, I tell my kids that if you guys don't work hard, then I'll keep working till my 80s. Not that I have to work, but I think they start to relate to how their father and mother actually worked this hard. Only by doing can they understand the value of perseverance and little things like paper tissue wastage, water wastage, and energy savings, and all sorts of little things that you can talk about. My son's name is Prithvi, and it actually means earth. I talk a lot about the earth and sustainability and how we really think about time, water, and energy, and all this stuff is just part of what they have to grow up with.
That's
Um,
interesting. By talking about names, you had a nickname as a child called Atal.
yeah, in fact, thank you for all the research you've done. Tal is actually resolute, and I think it's carried me through my life. Even as young as 16, 17, I had gotten into the IT. They're fiercely competitive examinations. So there's only 200,000 people that used to get through amongst millions who take the exam. Sorry, 2,000 people that get through. and it's just 1% of the people that could even afford to go to these IITs. And the first time I'd gotten a rank of 1,400, and I'm like, I really want to study computer science and nothing else. And I came back and quit the college for the first year after 2, 3 months, and nobody had done that before. Very few people, maybe one handful of people might have done it. I think that required a ton of resoluteness. People talk about how could you leave the bird in hand for the two in the bush. Same thing, the way my wife and I got married, the way we met with each other, required a ton of resoluteness as well. And I mean, doing companies requires so much of resoluteness about not thinking about the bird in hand, but the two in the bush.
What was required for you and your wife to get married?
For one, we had never met each other for 10 months. I was in Austin. She was, imagine, thousands of miles away in India.
Did you know how she looked?
Yeah, in fact, she sent me a picture, but that's all I had about her. And I had a website and UT's CS department and everything else. So we but basically just saw each other in pictures. I had more pictures than her. I only had one picture of hers. But we started talking on the phone in 97. Fairly expensive back then to actually call across the world. And I was getting a healthy stipend. I didn't have to pay for my fees and tuition, all that stuff. But I was getting bills with like $3,000, $4,000 every month. And I'm like, man, this is gonna make me bankrupt if this is how it continues. But it was fairly expensive to call. I mean, my wife would either be in India or be in a city called Muscat, which is where her father was posted. And these things were like $2.50 a minute. So it took a lot of economic toll as well to really get through everything. It was almost 3.5 years of long distance dating before we actually got married. Now we had married for 25 years, we have 3 children. And you look back and say, well, it took so much perseverance to really get through all that long distance stuff.
Actually, on the topic of marriage, I have to ask you. You and your wife, when you got together, you're both students, right? And then you get married. I'm assuming you didn't have any money back then. Then you started your career. You went to work for a bunch of people. When you started Nutanix, you didn't have a lot of money, I'm assuming. Then you had Nutanix, had to exit, you became super wealthy, and then you started the whole process again. And we'll get into why you started things again. But my question is, how did your relationship with your wife evolve during that period of time of, let's say, not having wealth and then currently now having wealth? How the dynamics of the relationship essentially change when you come into all that? And how did you make sure that you continue to work on building a relationship and you're the same people that you were previously and then essentially let wealth affect you individually?
Yeah, great question, by the way. The one thing that hasn't changed in the last 25 years is the fact that we look at all of this as one sort of trust, and literally the word trust matters. It's shared amongst both of us. We don't do things like, hey, I'm just going to go and do this. I have so many friends who actually say, hey, I like the car. My wife didn't agree with it. I just went in and did it anyway. We don't do it that way. We didn't do this 25 years ago. We don't do it today either. There's something to be said about at least two people having consensus on things. And to me, that matters a lot. Just the fact that we look at this as joint property and one bank account as opposed to having separate bank accounts. I think the kids also can read through all that when they see all this stuff going independent of each other. It takes effort, but it keeps you together for longer as well. And of course, we have our tastes, like little things, but I don't go buy a car on my own just because I like it. I have to convince her that this is actually, it just so happens that we've really shared tastes. I think both of us have never counted money. We always said, look, assume we have nothing, because that's the only way children, going back to your last question, if they come to know what is in our bank account, they may become very complacent about things. So we don't talk about money at all. We don't talk about what it took to buy homes and this and that. Not counting money makes you feel like you're still at zero. And it's a good place to be in. It keeps you grounded. Literally, we avoid private jets and all this stuff. Not that we couldn't, but we're like, hey, unless we are in a country and we have to do this country in 10 days, we I personally avoid a lot of that stuff myself as well. There's so many luxuries that I could actually go through. I'm like, no, I think I have to fly commercial. It's important that I do that. Only then will they realize what it means to actually just have life and stuff like that. So it's just the basics, making sure you stay grounded is very important, and not counting your chickens before the eggs have hatched. And when I say eggs have hatched, before the children have really done something of significance for themselves.
By the way, I'm on my next flight. I hope to see you with me in the back in economy.
Yeah. Well, at least I don't do economy, but I can say that just doing commercial alone makes everybody say, look, we're going to share it with everybody else. And you can get so far away from reality when you try to do everything so exclusive and such.
So then, how do you think wealth has changed you? I want to know when you hit the real first milestone when it came to money. Like, what was that feeling? Did you feel like you robbed a bank all of a sudden? Like when the Nutanix went public, and all of a sudden this whole entire like chunk just into your bank account, and you've never seen so much money before in your life. What was that feeling?
I enjoy life more than I did 12, 13 years ago when building a company. Back in the day, it was just about company, 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 and nothing else mattered. It was like a job. Now, at least we take some breaks in the middle, like a week off 4 times a year or something. Is a good way to really, because we know the children are growing as well and growing fast. It's important for them to appreciate a few things together, like history. I love history, and I'm like, okay, we should go to every place that is full of history before they've actually had their own lives and their own companions and significant others. So we enjoy life a lot, enough to say that we can take 4 vacations while I'm still working this hard every day. We enjoy cars, my wife and I, but again, it's not inordinate. We could basically go berserk, but like, hey, let's have as many as what people can drive and maybe one more. I don't think we look at wealth as if it's a bank account, because even for entrepreneurs, a lot of it is just stock anyway. I mean, if you're really believing in something, you actually have to hold on it for long enough. When we went public, I still thought it was all paper money, which is the reason why I could take big risks after going public as well. Remember, Nutanix was not a done deal until it was a done deal. This next 4 or 5 years is about, okay, we got to take a bigger risk now as a public company to transform its business model, which nobody in tech had done as a public company. Nobody. Going from hardware to software to subscription, like dealing with it like a cloud, was unprecedented in the history of public markets. So that risk taking was also because I was not counting money. Because had I counted money and I said, there's so much to lose now, Nutanix would have been done. You had to say that, look, you're still at ground zero. It's still paper money. You can still take some risks. And those are the risks that have actually helped the company basically go through its journey of sitting next to the public cloud and calling itself a decent private cloud software and so on.
As a second-time founder with your new company, DevRev, how do you still keep and apply that same mindset?
I feel it's paper money. We're a private company. There's a bit more bootstrapping this time than it was the first time. The cap table looks a lot different than the way it looked the first time. But, I still don't like a lot of physical investments in real estate, even as a business. I read the book Outsiders maybe 8 years ago. It's a good read of 8 CEOs who did this for the first time. They talk about John Malone and the edifice complex. This idea that when you grow big, you start doing big physical investments and things. I see that in the Salesforce Tower. I'm like, man, that is the next Sun Microsystems. They had so many buildings everywhere. Keeping a tab on your physical investments that are not going to grow at all, they're going to grow 6% if anything, is very important. You'd rather invest in people and in technology and all the things that will appreciate 10x over the course of the next 5 years. I've really kept that kind of ethos in our current investments. Let us make sure that we don't invest in things because they look big and massive and royal and stuff. Invest in people, but also find hunger anywhere in the world. Not just hunger, but innovators. We'll talk about both the supply side and demand side. But talent is everywhere. And it's not easy to have a global company as a young company, to have 3, 4, 5 offices. But we knew that if you could instill this owner's mindset, then you could find hunger anywhere. Because remember, 2021, 22, 23 was crazy times. Interest rates was zero, money was cheap, entitlement was massive. And like, okay, how do you really find hunger? in all of this. So we had to go far and wide to find hunger, not just in the US and Austin, but also Argentina and Ljubljana and Bangalore and Chennai and places like that. So we really said, look, we're going to have to build a global company from day one. It'll stretch our dollar further ahead as well and keep us thinking like a long-term company with big ambition. The amount of money that would take to actually create that ambition wouldn't be, a billion. I could do that for 200 million. That'd be a great place to be.
How do you assess for hunger and big ambition in talent?
I think hunger to me is a proxy for long-term greed. Really good article from New York Times 2017. I still remember it. It's about they interviewed 300 CEOs, good CEOs, and how do you be a CEO from 300 of them. And it talks about three virtues. Like, okay, of course, there's a lot that's uncommon about these 300 people, but there's few patterns that really come together. And one of them was how they did their current job really well without constantly angling for the next one. That to me is long-term greed. If anything, they're using reverse psychology. So no, I don't need the next one, in fact. And then the world says, what do you mean you don't need the next one? You absolutely deserve the next one. 99% of the people in the world are angling for the next thing. While they're at this thing, they're peripherally looking at the next promotion, the next whatever. To me, hunger is when you're so focused on the current, the bird in hand, that the two in the bush will come to you. The world will push you to have the two in the bush, as opposed to you constantly fighting for it. I say this to a lot of our leaders, managers, directors. If you just did your current jobs extremely well, you will realize that this reverse psychology that I don't need anything else is going to make you more. That to me is hunger.
I love that because it applies across all aspects of life. Don't chase happiness. If you're chasing happiness, you'll never get happy. Don't chase wealth. You're never going to accomplish all. But it's the people that are so focused in what they're doing and being present with themselves in their environment and everything. Those are what then happiness just comes to you. Wealth just comes to you.
Yeah,
Obviously, you
yeah.
put in the work.
And while I was talking, I just realized that it's so paradoxical because hungry people are abundant. They believe in their current abundance. So they're never vying for the. And by the way, maybe that's the way hunger actually keeps people surviving, is because they have figured out what truly matters.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden that makes them survive and thrive.
Wow. You're a very spiritual person. I can see it. I'm going to get into your spirituality in a second, but we have to talk about your companies because this is a startup podcast.
Uh-huh.
Tell me why you started Nutanix and the timing when you started. When you started Nutanix, that was just the beginning of the financial crisis of 2008. What was the conversation you had with your wife when the economy was going down? And you're like, I'm going to take all my eggs, put it into one basket. We're going to try to build this company. Talk to me about the timing and that conversation and on the challenges you faced in getting it off the ground.
It's 2009. February is when I started to really feel a sense of ownership for this previous company that I hadn't founded. I was employee number 12 or 15, maybe 12. I was a VP of engineering building data warehouses, software running on commodity servers. This is pre-cloud, but it was kind of ascent of commodity servers and things like that. Distributed systems, open source software, Linux, and all this stuff was coming together. And as you start to really begin in ownership for that company, even though I had sub 1% stake in that company, you start to really want to die for that company. I really want to make this company big. And then you realize, because this was the time when NoSQL is taking off because of Hadoop and Yahoo and Google opening up those things with MapReduce. And all of a sudden you realize that your SQL world might be shrinking. At least in the fashion fad, we were going through that. Okay, who needs SQL when there's NoSQL? Developers were actually going towards Java and NoSQL. So the realization was we got to really figure out how to not fight it, but embrace it. It can't be the enemy. If you could build a distributed system without having that religion that all you do is SQL and don't do anything about NoSQL. But then talking to the founders, spending some time with them, I realized that it's their company after all. You can't just go change it. And they'd gone through a lot in the financial crisis themselves. So who am I to actually say that we should change tack and figure out a bigger investment in really getting both sides of the aisle on data management right? So I think there were three of us who kind of knew each other for a decade or more. And we started talking. We said, look, it's not our company, it's their company. And there's only so much you can move the needle for that. So if we really have a strong gut, let's go apply it to our own. And so that's how the idea came about. It's not like we thought of ourselves as entrepreneurs. You just basically have this sense of, I wouldn't even say indignation, but this sense of, okay, you got to use your gut at a place which you can call your own. One thing led to another. It took us 6, 7, 8 months to quit. And you didn't think about, hey, we're going through the worst time of the world economy. This was bigger than the Great Depression of 1930s, And you basically said, look, things will turn out because at some level, when things are this low, they will actually open up too. You start to rationalize things because the best companies have started during recession, and then eventually I realized why it happens. By the time you spend the slump years building a product, the market has gone through its worst. And when your product is ready, is when the market's purse strings open up too. They start to get optimistic, a little hopeful. And if you can ride that wave of optimism with the market, nothing like it. I think that's what happened. Our product was far from perfect, not that stable in the early years because we had bet on commodity hardware and VMware's architecture. Because there was hope, just that level of optimism you can carry through with people, good things happen. 2020 was the time when I'd spent almost 11 and a half years at Nutanix, and February happened. Every customer's data center where we used to ship software had to shut down. Everybody started talking about the hyperscalers being the only alternative to private data centers. The investor in me said this transition is here to stay. We can be like the ostrich in the sands and think that public cloud is actually going to be only for a sliver. It's going to be the majority. I think it started to happen when we went public, when investors were asking about the public cloud a lot. And we were proud of this idea of invisible infrastructure. We can do one click everything. And we've done a fairly good job, but there was something more invisible than our invisible, which you could just rent and stream infrastructure as opposed to own infrastructure. People would start to rent more rather than own more, stream more rather than own more. Had it not been for the public cloud, we probably had been bigger than VMware. Probably would be a $100 billion company. Right now, we're in the range of 2025 in that range. But I think the glass ceiling was a new consumption model, a new way to consume infrastructure and stream infrastructure. And therefore, the investor in me basically said, look, I'm the only one with so much of personal wealth tied to this company. I need to figure out a way to diversify. And the developer in me basically said, I won't start a new company on-prem. On-prem is now for the largest of the large enterprises. And that's where a lot of legacy applications will get repackaged and re-architected with Nutanix-like software. But all new action is going to move to the public cloud. And it became an easy decision. In fact, it was way easier for me than it was for all the people around me. People were like, how could you, this identity of this company, and you are so tightly coupled. I just realized I'm very good at letting go, like really, really good at letting go. So good that I could write a book on it.
I have so many questions. One thing's amazing to see, like if you look at all the co-founders from Nutanix, each one right now is on their second startup, and each one of those startups are worth $1 billion. It's insane, absolutely insane.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the untalked about, you know, PayPal mafia kind of stuff. There's a mafia here too. And if you add Bipul to it, Bipul is the CEO of Rubrik. That's almost a $20 billion company as well. Bipul was the first investor who joined Blumberg Capital, if he's talking about Bruce Tarragon. Bipul was the first money in Nutanix. So the first couple of million that Blumberg put in was worth hundreds of millions of dollars over time.
I heard a great story of how you acquired your first customer from Nutanix. Do you remember it?
I think it's the groundedness of investors like Bruce and David. They didn't have any shame to say, let's go fight it together with a joint customer and part of their network. Bruce has a very close network of customers too. Imagine if that first one didn't come through. And it was a force fit, even for the CIO of this company to the law firm, like one of the largest law firms in the country. They're like, I don't think I need this system right now. Bruce is like, what are you talking about? This is our company and you're part of a network. You got to give it a try, man. And it was that level of entitlement in the network that I feel is how businesses are made. You got to have that level of, okay, you shed your shame and just talked about why somebody needs to help you out. One thing led to another. That law firm customer initially was a quiet taste for them. They probably didn't use us for like first 3 years, but when they did, they changed everything. They became a $10 million plus account for us because the product also kept improving. So we needed that chance. And through the network, through an investor and a hustler like Bruce and David, you actually got through the thing. And that's why I have so much gratitude for those folks.
Yeah, the way how Bruce describes it, he's sitting in the room, Dheeraj. There was no air conditioner. We didn't have money for air conditioner then, and we're sweating away. I have this law firm on the other line trying to convince him to use the product to get it, and it's just incredible to hear that first initiate the first customer how it came about. But how did your leadership skills and your own personality develop as you scaled the company from one employee to what it was at the time of the IPO until now, which is a few hundred? How did your own internal personality and your leadership skills and how did and the principles that you developed along the way, how did that scale? How did it come about?
One thing that has stayed constant is humanism, which even our enemies appreciated a lot. VMware and us, we would be at each other. And yet they're like, wow, they're building something uniquely different. A lot of it had to do with it's like the army that we had built was fiercely loyal because we knew we'd take care of them, as opposed to transactional. Because how do you take on incumbency if you're not aligned on a strategy, but together as a flock? We were authentic with our people. What you say is what you get. Integrity for us with our own people, including our customers, was doing things when they were not watching, and nobody could actually say, look, they say one thing and do another. It became a very simple company that way. I became better every year at radical candor versus ruinous empathy, as Kim Scott would say. Below the line, those two things, manipulative insincerity and obnoxious aggression, the two of those, you never see that at Nutanix nor at DevRev either. I worked a lot on ruinous empathy. I don't think I actually had too much of it. Maybe because of the way I grew up, there was so much toughness that I'm like, okay, I think I can handle this. I really started to appreciate operations along the way too. I mean, when you start out, you're a more optimistic person. And then we start to really become, I mean, we had 7,000 employees at Nutanix at the height. It still is about 6,000 people. But I think doing this in a distributed way with country managers, regional people, making them feel like they own their franchise with a level of autonomy and knowing that they can never bribe a channel partner and never do shady business was a very important piece of this puzzle. We would make examples of people who would try to do anything hokey pokey. Along the way, I appreciated design a lot, not just product design, but organizational design, process design. I was big into systems from day one. In 2011, I'm like, okay, we need an ERP system. People are like, what? This is a 2011 company. I'm like, no, no, no. And we're going to do it well. Now, we didn't go SAP, but we went NetSuite. And I said, once we are down this path of NetSuite, we're never going to change it. Now, starting 2013, 14, there was like, I just started to hover around $100 million number. SAP was encircling you everywhere. Like, hey, you're going to outgrow NetSuite. You got to come to SAP. I'm like, over my dead body, I'll do that right now because that'll be a 3, 5 year project in itself. I think systems was something that I always liked and appreciated. In many ways, that led to the formation of DevRev because we're building a system across all these silos of systems that exist today. That love for process and systems continued from Nutanix and NetSuite and customer support and not liking Salesforce and Jira that much to say, hey, we can actually do better, is what really has become the strategy for this new company.
It's amazing that something as a child you probably disliked from your father trying to implement a new system, like you see, it's become the bedrock of everything you do right now. But did you have an executive coach or a therapist that you work with to develop all these tools you're mentioning? Because these are all interpersonal tools.
So I had lots of friends who were also my mentors, and they were authors of books and professors at university. One of my favorite mentors and also one of my dearest friends is Deepak Malhotra, who is a psychology professor. He teaches negotiation at Harvard Business School. And we kindred spirits, we talk a lot, we talk business, but we talk a lot about just human psychology at large. There's another mentor of mine who's also a really good friend, with Mike Robbins, and he talks about vulnerability and authenticity and all that. I learned a lot about formulaically applying authenticity. He talks about dishonest people, honest people, how you need to take self-righteousness out and add vulnerability to be on this path of good to great. It's like honesty is good, but great is authentic. There are people like Brené Brown, Simon Sinek, who I've actually brought to our events and really try to follow them, not just from afar, but from close as well. And then there is just really good leaders like Bob Gates and Condi Rice that I've been close to and learned a lot from them as well. And of course, I think books are a big part of my thinking. I read as much as I can do. And I think history is a big part of this too, because I definitely believe that the more things change, the more they remain the same.
Yeah, that is so true. But when it comes to change, was it, and especially when it comes to the things you mentioned regarding vulnerability and other aspects, was it due to circumstances in your life that you had to make this change, or was something that, or was it about like I want to become the best version of myself so I could show up at my company, at Nutanix, I could show up in my marriage, in my family life. How did was it? What was it?
I think the other sort of framework that I really appreciate is Nicholas Taleb's anti-fragility. He says fragile systems, resilient systems, and then they're anti-fragile systems. Resilience is not good enough, just like honesty is not good enough. Vulnerability to one is shock to the other. He talks about shocks. Like if you actually shock systems and they get better at handling shocks, just like the human body, the immune system, and our bones. I really believe in shocks. I believe in suffering, in vulnerability. Maybe that's the entrepreneur's way of saying normalize adversity. How bad can it get? Well, you're ready for it, you're prepared for it. It's bound to happen. And all you can do is get better and make sure you don't do it again. I have used it as a way to not go through the highs and lows of every day because there's so many losses on an everyday basis. There's so many victories on an everyday basis. How much can you be on this journey following the line like this every day versus an average line? I think tried to really follow the average line. And the average line has to go like this. It can't be this and it can't be that. Breathing has helped a lot. Breath meditation to me is a big part of this, insisting on sleeping well and all that. So I think breathing, sleeping have been a big part of just making sure that I stay on an average line rather than going through the highs and lows. I mean, I've not gotten angry in 10, 15 years. When I do get angry, it's really when I'm really angry. Making sure on an everyday basis I keep all that emotion to myself is a very important piece of this too.
Were you an angry person in the past?
When I was in my 20s, I was angry. I would say I was hot-headed. I'm like, this doesn't make sense. It did plow me through Oracle, for example, because you needed to be a little bit of this. How can you not bring change? Bipul and I were peers, and for 4 years, we just brought the biggest amount of change to a product that was looking more and more mainframe-ish. Imagine Oracle database running $10 billion worth of business. And the two of us were like, let's go make big changes to this. And we did. And some of this was just about bringing that level of hot, like how we have to. It helped.
In such large organizations, sometimes there's no other choice but to do that.
Yeah, and obviously you have to be making sure that you're not throwing caution to the winds. We learned a lot about quality and testing and paranoia. I had a great manager. He and I had the same manager in Amit Ganesh, the really good guy who was probably one of the most brilliant out of the box analytical thinkers that I've worked with, which also takes me back to this idea of when you're young, you need to have great managers, period. If you don't have good managers, you're done.
You need that mentorship. I saw somewhere else talking about principles, values, and the things that you work on. There's something that you discuss, which is the power of three, right?
Yeah. In fact, so all these three numbers are my favorite. I think in product management, a lot about the number one. And one is better than two, two is better than three in that sense. But in life, the number two is better than one because it's paradoxical. Like everything is duality. When you think there's a this side to it, there's an X prime side to that as well. And this is true for leadership at large. Most life decisions are paradoxical, and they're opposites that you've got to balance. That's basically what leadership is all about. You got to really acknowledge the fact that there'll be opposites. One day I'm optimistic, the next day I'm paranoid. One day I'm thinking about short term, next 3 weeks, the other day I was thinking about the next 3 years. One day I'm thinking about sprints, the other way I'm thinking about marathons. One day I'm thinking about global, the other way I'm thinking about local. There's so many of these that you just have to balance on an everyday basis. So the number two to me is very respectful and amazingly powerful for that reason. Three comes in for me simply because it's a crowd. Three is a beautiful crowd. I think when it comes to systems and choices and organizations, you realize you can only get two out of the three. Pick two. And it takes you back into this, thinking about which two are you going to really take and so on. The number three also is balance. I mean, many a time when we draw these things about trade-offs in any kind of design process, product design, you've got to pick these three things because if you can't say three, it's probably not a complete system. So it's the alliteration of X, Y, and Z. You don't stop at X and Y, A, B, and C, and one, two, and three. The moment you finish it at three, you realize that you probably have something that is complete. I think a lot about the number three. It's been a big part of my product thinking, my design thinking. And then you also think about which two will you pick out of the three.
What three things are you currently working on right now? Are you applying this system?
So in our platform, I'll talk to you about the dualities too, which is two. So agents and apps. Like, okay, we got to build agents, but you got to also have apps. Just like when there was a fashion about NoSQL, SQL didn't go away. When there's a fashion about Apple and tablets, Windows didn't go away. When there's fashion about public cloud, private cloud hasn't gone away. It just has a different use case now and so on. So when we think about agents, we are a company that helps people build agents. We build some of our own agents in customer experience. We also appreciate jobs. Like jobs are here. They're not just vanishing in the world of AI. So what will humans do? Well, they'll also need modern apps that are very much in consonance with agents. So how do you think about agents and apps? We think about design. There will be a conversational interface at the core of new surfaces where you chat with things like ChatGPT, but then you also need graphical interfaces because that's what apps will need to have. So this and that is very important for us as well. But then we have these powers of three, like we have search, answers, and reasoning. That is a crawl, walk, and run for AI. Like be the best at search and answers. Search is about data. How do you bring the data fastest to our system so that you can search them the best? That is the crawl in the AI journey. If you can't do search well, you can't do anything. Now you go from that to answer. It's more than just individual lookups. You got to stitch things together into smaller molecules. That's answers. And for that, you might have to write some code to get these answers. Finally, there's reasoning where you have to fine tune models and get weights. I think a lot about crawl, walk, and run for our customers. Don't throw them reasoning when they can do search first. Have them crawl and really think about AI from search point of view before you get to answers and before you get to reasoning. We have three modern apps: support, build, and grow. They're all built on the same platform. How do you do customer support? How do you build software? How do you grow your customers with a modern CRM? It keeps things balanced when we think about the powers of three that way.
Why did you start DevRev? Like, did you not have enough doing Nutanix and that whole entire journey? Why did you go?
Yeah, I think when I turned 45 in 2020, I have another 20 years to give to this industry if I stay healthy. At least another 20 years. And honestly, if I can keep working, I might be able to live longer too. Because what happens to people start to think in their own minds that they're done, which is the opposite of Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger and so many people who've lived in the 90s. Even politicians you don't like or whatever, the reason why they live long is because they have a purpose. They're actually full of vigor when they have to argue in the Senate floor and you know understand what it means to do diplomacy or this or that, get their votes. So I just figured if I have to live long enough to enjoy our children's lives and be a part of their lives and so on, you just got to have purpose. And purpose comes when you're focused and you're operating, building something. It keeps you relevant. I think at 45, Vinod asked me, have you heard of GPT? Vinod Khosla from Khosla Ventures. He was also my early investor in Nutanix. And I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And then I started to do some reading. I mean, he's more current than I am. And obviously, he was the first institutional investor in OpenAI. So there's something to be said about you got to really at least try to read and be relevant like the way he is. And I started to read. I didn't know how to make sense of the Transformer paper, the 2017 paper. But in the last 12, 18 months, I've become so vigorous in this whole area. I mean, I can visualize a lot of AI in my head now. Maybe not the math behind transformers, but the empirical side of it, the practical side of it. I don't know if I would have been able to say this 5 years ago when I started DevRev. I feel like the ability to get back to being good at math again. I was really good at math 30 years ago, like extremely good at the most profound of math in my undergrad days. And I feel like some of that is coming back, which keeps my gray cells active.
It's a retirement definitely kills people. I don't know why people retire to begin with. But touching upon the subject of AI, and from your perspective right now, like how do you see us? The acceleration process is happening so quickly, and it's literally I feel so dumb and stupid now because like every day it's like something new, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's almost impossible to keep up with. But you're looking at it from a macro perspective, like where do you see us heading over the next, I guess, 18 months, 24 months, and going forward?
So, for one, like the internet boom and the bust, maybe 2% will survive because we've let 1,000 flowers bloom, but eventually, like Darwinism, there's only a few that will come. Real plants and trees and sequoias after that. So I'm mindful of that. I'm like, okay, we got to really plow through this froth. If you build good platforms, operating systems thinking, AI is now engineering, it's not science anymore. It's not just research. There's a ton that you can do with AI, with engineering, building great systems. And that's what's going to take you through. That's what took Amazon through the froth of the dot-com era because they said, look, we're going to have to really think about customer support and billing and identity and all sorts of things that others had not thought through, including, okay, we can open up to resellers. Yeah, I know we have our warehouses, but what does it mean? Which is when AWS came about. They're like, well, they need to upload their catalog, and we can't get that to the master catalog if you don't have these systems with a million resellers. I think thinking about the operating system is the way to not just build a feature company. It is when you can get 10, 15, 20 million, but it's hard to get to 100 and then impossible to get to a billion with a feature, and just being in that one vertical. So my bias is that you've got to build horizontal software and great use cases on top. You will have to pick one or two use cases to begin with, but nobody can take away this sort of opinion that you need to have about, okay, this will have multiple use cases. And that's the way you get leverage. That's the way you build efficient companies. That's the way, you'll actually be able to grow your TAM without acquiring companies in the future that are going to be highly inefficient to acquire. So I feel like if you think about the new generation of college hires and people who are coming out of college, they'll be fine. The people who are in their 30s and 40s will have to struggle to understand this. But if they're paranoid about things, they'll survive, you know. It's the people who are like the Apple paper that came out 2, 3 days ago about how LLMs are so dumb or whatever. I'm like, that's the problem. If you become an ostrich in the sand, you don't need LLMs to do everything by hand. Just like humans didn't have to. I mean, you would develop trains and trucks to do things that we couldn't do on our own. LLMs can generate code for anything they can do on their own. So code is a great way that they're becoming sharp. They understand code like there's no tomorrow. They can spit out code and software like there's no tomorrow. So for everything they can't do deterministically or with enough accuracy, they will talk another language. And that's a powerful place to be in. And I feel like any company that is actually poo-pooing LLMs, like, oh, they can't do this, they can't do that. It's no different than 20 years ago when Oracle had this thing about cloud as a fashion fad, or IBM had these things. So I think big companies that are going to use that will actually be doing it at their own peril.
Right. Interesting. I share very similar viewpoints in that aspect of what you mentioned, the people regarding the college kids, they'll be just fine. I think it's that people between 30 and 45 that are mid-career that's all of a sudden feel like that fear. But like you mentioned, people that are anxious will survive because they'll go ahead and educate themselves. I want you to talk to me about how you think about philanthropy and charity. And the beautiful organization Paramhansa, which I'm not sure what that stands for. If you could tell me what it
Yeah.
means and everything about it, how you think about it.
So the chief investment officer for family office, he's a good friend from 40 years. He was managing a large fund at Columbia Threadneedle. Also happens to be a Columbia MBA from 2004-05 time frame. I know him from middle school actually, and in 2020 we started talking about, because I'm not a good investor. I'm like, okay, I need somebody to really take care of money. And he was big into yoga and Paramahansa yoga, the person Steve Jobs really respected. In fact, at his funeral, the one book that everybody got who got to his funeral was Yogananda's book. It was in pursuit of Paramhansa because Yogananda came in I think 1920 and then basically proliferated yoga in the US for like 20, 30 years. A lot of people went back to India to understand yoga, like even Steve Jobs went and Mark Zuckerberg and Mark Benioff, they all went back to India. In fact, even to find this one Baba, Neem Karoli Baba, who the Beatles had met in 67, but Jobs couldn't meet in 71, 72 when he went to India. There's something about yoga that is powerful. And now this has been an acquired taste for me, but again, my CIO was somebody that I said, this is the way in which you also have him be like an owner and a co-founder in this whole thing. So the family office is named after Paramahansa, and also the philanthropy is named after Paramahansa. The more I understand inner strength and the power of breathing, the more I appreciate what yoga has stood for thousands of years. The philanthropy piece for us initially was a little bit on the geekier side. We said, look, we're going to learn about computing and biology and how the two shall meet, because these are the two big things happening around us. Computing is obviously getting more, I would say, with AI. Biology has to get more computational in the future. And I think these are the two worlds that we need to build a Venn diagram around and really have them fuse. So in the 2021-22 era, we said, look, we're going to try to find all applications of computing on the biology side and vice versa. And we realized that researchers and scientists and doctors, they're not talking to each other. They're just in their own silos, and because one of them doesn't appreciate the other. And there's very few really, really good computer science people who are willing to go into biology or medicine at large. And obviously context matters. And many people in biology, they're like, well, I don't think these people know how software can be used. So I think our whole idea of the philanthropy was to really get both sides to sit together and work together and so on. So we've done a lot of work in computational oncology with not a lot of work ourselves, but we funded a lot of this stuff: computational oncology, computational biology, synthetic biology, and a lot of really good ideas that gives me goosebumps thinking about, like using microbes on our skin to really solve cancer. There are things that you could do with bacteria. There's some amazing people that I hang out with who I learn a lot from, and it just keeps me relevant. Philanthropy is a way to keep learning without having to go read a lot of books. If you just sit with these professors, you get a lot. So being a fly on the wall has been very helpful.
I like to separate philanthropy and charity, where philanthropy is like incredible things that you're doing, like curing cancer and things like that. And charity is going back to your home village and giving the family that doesn't have anything money, giving them charity.
Yeah, and I think we've done a lot with education that way. The long tail of our philanthropy has been about education and about maybe in the last 2.5 years, we worked fairly closely in looking at schools and the underprivileged folks who actually need a little bit from us, and a little bit goes a long way for this base of the pyramid segment of society. It just makes you humbled as to the small things that can make a huge difference in their lives.
It's all about the small things.
It helps our children as well to grow better because now they understand adversity by just even being a part of that. They understand adversity better.
Do you ever just sit and wonder and just look at your life and like, holy hell, like I'm a kid from the Indian village. How did this all happen?
There is gratitude mostly and grace for everything that has happened, and also friends along the way that you've made, and relationships and all that. Sometimes people used to ask me, did you plan for all of this stuff? I think you probably think a year ahead, but you never go for the eventual because you don't know what that eventual will be. Because now you're being tendentious, you're trying to shape it towards something. It's like chasing wealth or chasing a promotion or something. Just do a really good job this coming year and expect that you'll learn more. Time will reveal a lot of things too, because time reveals things you just didn't know before. So being a part of the journey of where time is going to reveal things is just a very exhilarating experience too.
So why do you do what you do now? What's your motivation behind everything?
I think it's the hunger. I'm still very hungry because I want to stay relevant for my children, for my wife, for my parents. I think if I just played golf and said, "Look, I'm going to go around the world," how could you? I mean, the children are still going to school, so it's not even like my wife and I can just take off and travel the world forever. So we grounded literally for those reasons too. It keeps you relevant. There's a little bit of this thing that you get like, wow, I forgot my linear algebra thing, and I need to know that because maybe I have to teach my children in the next 4 or 5 years too. I think it's relevance. And waking up from bed every day and saying, you got to actually understand this very difficult thing that it's hard to understand. Sometimes it's not very profound, it's just this hairy problem. Like today, we have to figure out existing customers and new customers, apps and agents, reliability and frictionless design. There's so much of these opposites. It's about resource allocation, prioritization, planning, thank you, and forgiveness with our customers. All this stuff takes a lot of energy, but it's great energy because if I solve this problem in the next 3 months, imagine what the next could look like. You're also in pursuit of, in some sense, the dopamine, the endorphin, the oxytocin that really keeps you going. The biochemical stuff is very important for health. I keep checking my heart. I'm like, okay, it looks clean, but a big part of this has to be the biochemistry that comes with work and purpose.
It's just amazing to see how you mix it all together. The spiritual aspect of everything is interwoven. It's almost part of the design of the company. And also the physical aspect, because healthy mind, healthy body equals a healthy soul. And that way you're able to show up like the best version of yourself into every part of life, your family, business. It sounds very much like you've integrated it all into one cohesive system.
It has to be. I can't be three people, actually. That's the hard part. In fact, I'm taking the easier way out. Like, okay, what I'm at office is what I'm going to be at home, and anywhere I show up, I have to be one person.
Wow. Do you still have a chip on your shoulder?
I think more than that, this underdog feeling, which is what keeps me going too. I mean, if you say, what is the input to all this stuff? It's the underdog thing because it gives you drive. Like right now, against Salesforce, there's an underdog thing for us, and it's a great place to be in. Being an underdog is amazing.
I couldn't agree more. So then your daughters bring home their friends for the weekend and you're going to do a Q&A session with them. What's the advice you're giving the younger generation for life to set them up for success in personal and professional?
They actually chuckle with this. And one of my daughters started to make fun of me now. She's like, you have to be better than AI models, right? And she says this almost every week because I talk about Chat GPT to them. Like, did you Chat GPT that? Oh, you've got to be better than AI models, right? But I think, they're growing up in this era of Chat GPT, like the way we grew up in the era of Google. We got search right, they're getting answers right. At some point, they've got to figure out reasoning. I'm like, you got to learn to reason. You got to keep reasoning. It can't be just asking something all the time. And that something will make you dumb. I mean, like the way we got dumb with direction over time.
Yeah.
So keeping that muscle going. And, I heard this from one of my mentors in AI. His name is Alex DeMarcus. He's a professor at UCB, Berkeley, and then previously at UT Austin. Why do you have to learn math now when AI can do it? It's like, why do you have to lift weights? It's the muscle you build to think about other things. And that's what they need to appreciate. That look, you got to work out your mind, your brain, so you can really keep reasoning over time. Even in dealing with people, you have to reason a lot. A big part of anything you do is conflict resolution and trade-offs and picking two out of the three things in life. If you can't reason, it's hard for you to actually do anything well in life.
Yeah, I firmly agree with that. Wow. Dheeraj, I thoroughly enjoyed this.
Likewise,
This is
your questions were extremely thoughtful and thought-provoking as well. And you took me to a different sort of my co-founder, Manoj, keeps me very grounded at DevRev. We have my co-founder who's also a very kindred spirit for me. And he reminds me of my own podcast. He's like, did you listen to that? I'm like, no, I don't listen to my podcast, because sometimes I feel like I don't know how embarrassing it would be to listen to yourself. But he keeps it real. When I talk to him, I'm like, wow, there's so many things to learn from people like him.
very happy to schedule a weekly call with you to keep you real and grounded. I thoroughly enjoyed this. And I think, like you said, when you think about what do you want your legacy to be, it sounds like you think a lot about legacy. Specifically, let's say we'll take legacy in two parts. One is, what are you contributing to the world from a work standpoint, and what are you contributing to your family and everything else in charity. And to hear that for you, you have another 30, 40 years left, and that probably translates into another 2 startups, something like that. Probably unless DevRev is your last one, and then you build that for the next 30 years. You want to contribute to advancing technology, making it go further, and advancing what humans can do. That translates also into your philanthropy side, which is, finds the cure for cancer or everything else you're going to find over there. And then it's also your family, where God willing, one day you'll be a grandfather and you'll be able to give over the values that your parents instilled in you to your kids, and then God willing, your grandkids. And then the world continues around again. It goes to another cycle.
Beautifully said, actually. I am a firm believer in the idea of evolution and learning. The next 30, 40 years, if I can continue to evolve, because change is the only constant, I think I'll be adapting like the way I see people like Charlie Munger talk about Bitcoin when they were 97, 98, 99. I think you have to keep adapting to the changing world.
I agree firmly. So thank you, my friend.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Welcome.